The Garblin's been swinging a hot bat of late, 7 for his last 15. Here's the 2-1. Deep to left. That ball is gone. The crowd loves it. I've never heard this much generic Goblin noise.
Hey gang, using the promo code MTGMudsta, all caps, will get you 10% off any order over $10 at Flipside Gaming. It'll also get you 10% off any orders of singles at Multizone. And it'll get you 10% off most products at Original Magic Art, with the exceptions of some paintings. If these fine sites don't have what you're looking for, you can also consider using my affiliate link when ordering from TCGPLAYER. And if you'd like to join the generic Goblin gang to support this channel, there's a link to my Patreon in the description below. Today's game is another Trevor special, filmed in New York. We've got some new friends and some new commanders heading your way. First up, Trevor is playing his Vial Smasher and Ikra deck, keeping a Temple of Malady, Relic of Progenitus, Exsanguinate, Rites of Flourishing, Reap the Past, and a Forest. Jerkus, who's new to the channel, is bringing his partnered pair, Ravos and Reyhan, keeping a Cultivate, Wasteland, Field of Ruin, Godless Shrine, Shriekmaw, and a Plains. Clayton is playing his colorless Kozilek, keeping a Duplicant, All is Dust, Wastes, Reliquary Tower, Strip Mine, Hedron Archive, and Thematic Compass. Making his debut, Trevor's husband Tom is playing Freyalise and keeping Arbor Elf, Kindred Summons, Forest, Terastodon, Elvish Mystic, and Reliquary Tower. Jerkus wins the die roll and starts us off. Jerkus plays a tap Godless Shrine. Trevor's turn has him playing a Forest, and he pays 1 for a Relic of Progenitus. Tom plays a Forest and casts Llanowar Elves. Clayton plays a Waste and passes. Jerkus plays a Plains. Trevor plays a tap Temple of Malady, scrying 1 and bottoming it. Tom plays another Forest and casts an Elvish Mystic. He then plays out an Arbor Elf and passes. Clayton plays a Drown Your Temple and casts a Thematic Compass. He passes while finding the real card. Jerkus plays a Woodland Cemetery before casting a Cultivate. He finds a Forest for the field and a Swamp for the hand. At the end of turn, Trevor has him exile a card from his graveyard with the Relic. Trevor also plays a Woodland Cemetery and casts a Rites of Flourishing. He then plays a Bloodstained Mire. He sacrifices the Mire, losing 1 to save some time, and passes while searching. Tom draws his 2 and plays a Forest and a Reliquary Tower. He then taps 5 mana for the fantastic Freyalise and upticks her loyalty to make an Elf Druid token. He then passes to Clayton. Clayton draws his 2 and plays a Reliquary Tower. He then activates the Compass to go and find a Wastes, putting it to hand, and plays it for his turn before passing. Jerkus draws and plays a Wasteland and then a Strip Mine. He remembers to draw a second card at this point, and we then see a Vizier of the Menagerie. He looks at his top card and passes to Trevor. Trevor draws his 2 and plays a Mountain. He casts Kadama's Reach and finds a Swamp for hand and a Mountain tap for the field. Trevor then plays the Swamp for turn and brings out Vial Smasher. Tom draws 2 because of the Rites of Flourishing, and upticks Freyalise again to make another Elf Druid token. Tom then casts Elvish Promenade and makes 5 Elf Warrior tokens and puts them into play, and then passes to Clayton. Clayton draws his 2 and casts a Hedron Archive, which despite Tomer's best efforts, is actually still played. Clayton then plays a Seagate Wreckage and a tap Mirror Pool before passing. Jerkus draws his 2 and looks at his top card. He plays a Plains and a Swamp for turn, and then casts a Reclamation Sage off the top of his library. He targets Trevor's Relic as it enters, and Trevor taps it before letting it get destroyed to exile a card from Tom's graveyard. Jerkus then casts a Ramunap Excavator off the top of his library and passes turn. Trevor draws his card for turn, and for the Rites trigger, and he plays a land for turn. He pays 8 mana for Reap the Past, which will guarantee him all the cards in his graveyard to go back to hand, but before he does that, rolls for the Vial Smasher trigger. He hits Jerkus for 8 as a result. Trevor then replays his Bloodstained Mire and sacrifices it, losing 1 to go and find a Smoldering Marsh. He does shortcut though, announcing he'll cast the relic from said marsh, and passes while going to find the land. Tom draws his 2 and plays Cavern of Souls, naming elves, and a forest. He then makes another elf with Freyalise before playing out Lissalana Huntmaster. He decides not to attack, not wanting to make any enemies, and he passes. At the end of turn, Clayton uses his compass to go and find a wastes. Clayton draws his cards and gets a sense of the board. Trevor suggests he turn his attention to Jerkus, who has the potential to start strip mining 2 lands a turn, and Clayton decides to cast a duplicant. It comes in and exiles the Excavator. He then plays another Wastes, and activates the compass to go and find another Wastes. He plays it as his second land for turn, and then goes to his end step, transforming the compass once he's done shuffling. Jerkus draws his 2 for turn, and looks at his top card. He then pays 1 for the Deathrite Shaman that's sitting there, and looks again. 2 mana then gets him a Wall of Omens off the top, drawing a card as it enters. He then looks a third time. We then see a Gavany Township and a Field of Ruin come down, which is a lot of colorless lands for a 3-color deck in my opinion. He then plays Sylvan Library and pays 3 mana to cast a Wood Elves. They enter, and he goes to find a Forest land card. Jerkus settles on a Savannah, which comes in untapped. He then looks at his top card again, and casts a Veteran Explorer before passing to Trevor. Trevor draws his 2, and plays a Canyon Slough. He casts a Kadama's Reach in his main phase, and rolls for the Vial Smasher trigger, hitting Clayton for 3. Trevor then goes to find a land for his hand, and 1 for the field, announcing that he'll play the land from his hand for his land for turn. Trevor then passes. At the end of turn, Tom untaps a forest as Arbor Elf, and now has just enough mana to cast a Kindred Summons. He gets to reveal off the top until he hits a lot of elves, which in this case is 12. He hits Azuri, Findhorn Elves, Farhaven Elf, Elvish Champion, Heritage Druid, Priest of Titania, Rishkar, Caller of the Claw, Oracle of Moldiah, Elvish Archdruid, Fierce Empath, and Marwyn. At this point, Clayton kind of regrets not using the All Is Dust in his hand, and Marwyn then sees all the elves entering, gaining 11 +1/+1 counters. Tom then gets to search for a creature with his Fierce Empath, and reveals a Craterhoof Behemoth, and puts it to his hand. He then reveals off the top for the Oracle, showing a Soul of New Phyrexia. Tom then has Rishkar's Enter the Battlefield trigger put counters onto his Arbor Elf and Fierce Empath. He then decides not to find a basic with the Farhaven Elf Enter the Battlefield trigger. Tom then starts his own turn with a high 5 from Jerkus. Tom draws his 2, drawing the Soul, and revealing a Desert of the Indomitable, drawing that, before finally revealing Soul of the Harvest off the top. He plays the Desert tapped as Clayton double checks what the Soul does, and Tom upticks Freyalise once more. Tom then counts up all of his creatures, and with 25 elves, all of whom now also have Forest Walk because of the champion, and are also pumped slightly by the Elvish Archdruid, the table feels like they're all but dead. Trevor isn't willing to concede though, and wants to play it out. Tom then taps his Priest of Titania for over 20 mana, and casts a Siege Behemoth, and then a Craterhoof Behemoth. He then goes for broke with the Terastodon, and blows up the Relic again, and Jerkus' Library. With the targeting on the stack, Trevor sacrifices the Relic to exile all graveyards. Tom then announces he's moving to combat, and doesn't even get a chance to divvy up where the creatures are going since the table concedes to him. And the boys then all shake on a crushing victory. Game review time. I think today's game highlights just why you really need to control elf decks, and I think Clayton is probably kicking himself for not casting that All Is Dust during his main phase instead of ramping a little bit more. It was unfortunate that Clayton's deck didn't do more, as he was ramping at a good pace and drawing a decent amount of cards, and I would have been very interested to see how his colorless deck went. Jerkis' deck was also pretty sweet, and considering he didn't even cast his commanders, he did do some pretty cool stuff by playing off the top with the Vizier. He did seem in theory to be one of the stronger players at the table, with the Wastelands and the Strip Mine sitting on his field, and the Ramyak Excavator being able to bring those back whenever he wanted. Trevor's Vial Smasher and Ikra deck has certainly benefited from some new cards from Modern Horizons, like Reap the Past. I can easily see Trevor being able to get back a bunch of cards and at the same time blast opponents in the face, so that's a great inclusion in the deck. Tom playing Freyalise certainly put the fear of elves into Trevor himself, considering it was his own deck. It also highlights just how ridiculous Kindred Summonings is. If you type Kindred into Scryfall, you're going to find that the other instances of the Kindred spells are either enchantments or sorceries, and that's for good reason. Sure, it forces you to build around tribal themes, but let's face it, those are very powerful in EDH, and getting something like 11 plus bodies off of one spell at the end of someone else's turn is insane. Honestly, even if Tom hadn't hit the Fierce Empath, I think he could have downticked Freyalise on his following turn, drawn a bunch of cards, probably hit some ridiculous stuff like Gaia's Cradle, and at the very least find another lord or other way to help push some extra damage out of his elves. The Elvish Champion also did a lot of work, considering that two of his opponents had forests on the field, meaning that basically they couldn't do anything other than die. Please be sure to tune in every Monday and Thursday at 11 AM Eastern Standard Time for a guaranteed new video. You can also follow me on Twitter at MTGMudsta. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/MTGMudsta. And lastly, you can check me out when I stream at twitch.tv/MTGMudsta. This video is brought to you in support by my patrons. If you're looking for a way to help out the channel, please be sure to visit the link below. Thank you all for watching this video, and don't forget, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.